You're a Kryptonian, not classic enough? Todd's got you covered. Here's a look at the brand new McFarlane Toys, DC Superpowers Classic Superman. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, the Man of Steel fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way. It's sure nice to see Kal-El with more classic of a costume. How about before we look at that costume, though, let's grab the tape measure and see how tall the new classic Superman is from the DC Superpowers line. Superman, though, is going to stand at about 4.5 inches in height, maybe even 4 3/4 of an inch. We'll maybe stick with that. Translating, though, to a figure that's about 11.5 centimeters tall. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's noticed the McFarlane Toys has really finessed the Superpowers line. In fact, when you look at the classic Superman and you compare him with the original Superman, not that the original Superman was bad at all, but if you are one like myself that really grew up loving the Kenner Superpowers line, the one that we're getting now is a little bit more closer to that. Speaking, though, of which, let's also bring in the Cape Crusader that also looks a little bit more with a classic costume. And even though really she was a repaint, I don't know if we're ever going to be getting an updated version of Wonder Woman. Here's at least, though, the colors that look a little bit more closer to the Kenner days. Because Superman doesn't have accessories, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the packaging and the condition in which Amazon shipped this. That's actually where I ordered this figure. When I did get this in the mail, first of all, at least they shipped it in a box the size of this. Nothing was crumpled. Nothing was folded inside. Unfortunately, though, what was inside when I opened up the box was the clamshell piece of this was, in fact, upside down. So if you were to look at Superman, for example, instead of him looking like this the way he should, I actually had him arrive where he was upside down. Obviously, his cape wasn't dangling like that, but he was upside down like this. So it looked like maybe that the clamshell, I don't know if maybe the adhesive had come loose and that this just came loose completely. So what they did was, instead of worrying about the collector, I don't know, maybe wanting this to keep this mint on card, they actually just flipped this around, not even paying attention to where the placement of the figure should have been. And then they took this ugly, this ugly packing tape, and they ran it across the top of it. In fact, you probably can even see some of the what's left behind of the packing tape. I cut it on the side, and basically what I just did in order to get everything prepped for this review, I ended up just kind of gluing the side so that when I was looking at it at the beginning, I could at least make this look somewhat suggestive, like it was still sealed on card, when it clearly wasn't the case. I don't know, again, like Amazon, what are you guys doing? Sometimes, though, I've gotten things from Amazon and they came in pretty good condition. Other times, like the Kenner Superpowers Superman, it was just a disaster. By the way, though, while we are kind of looking at the packaging right now, I want to show you guys, it's not that much different from the original Superpowers Superman. You can see Superman flying off to the side there. Of course, on the back, there's quite a lot of characters. I've covered, I feel like, maybe 3/4 of the way through there. There's some standout ones that I still want to get my hands on, like, for example, that classic Brainiac and even Metamorpho. Maybe we might be getting that in a future review. There's also as well, not that something you could cut out necessarily as a file card, but a little bit of a read-up. I read this at the beginning of this review, and there's a couple of vehicles down below. Okay, so that's Amazon's screw-up aside. Yet Superman, unfortunately, doesn't come included with any accessories whatsoever. I guess the only thing that he really does come included with is a cape. The cape, though, one thing I will say, speaking of vast improvements, if we look at the original cape that Superman had, the material that they used, and I don't know if hopefully the camera's able to convey this, it was just kind of a plastic felt material. It was really a weird material that bunched up, unfortunately, especially around the collar area. The new cape that they're using all seems now to be a more softer fabric. So right away, the improvements are notable. Also, too, you can see, like, while this one did still have the Superman symbol on the back of his cape, this one now has a little bit more of a smaller Superman emblem, and I think it works a little bit better. So, like, right away, the capes are considerably a vast improvement. But then when you look at the figures themselves, I know some still like the original Superpowers, and I'm still of that variety. I'm still of that group that still like the original look of the Superpowers Superman. It's not a bad Superman. But one thing I will say, though, is I honestly did miss the classic-looking Superman. So I'm kind of glad to see that they are kind of doing this again, where they're getting us characters that look a little bit more like the way they did from the 80s. I know, old guy behind the camera, stuck in the past. You got a man move forward with things, but for me, at least, if you're going to be doing superpowers, there's nothing really wrong, I feel, with having characters that look like the original Kenner ones. One thing that's kind of interesting, though, about Superman is, first of all, he has a completely different new head sculpt. I don't mind the head. The one thing I will say, though, is I think the coloring of his face is a little bit too dark and muddy. As this to be a comparison, if you want to look at the original Superman, for example, they went with more of a lighter color. And while it's a little bit more modern Superman, I think the coloring of his skin would have worked a lot better with this face. But I feel like they went with a little bit more of a brown, and I feel like it's too brown. It looks like Superman's gotten himself a tan. The face also does have teeth visible, and initially I really didn't like the look of that. And I think the more that I've had this, and the more I've kind of had time to look at the figure and kind of play around, move his articulation, stuff like that, I think the smile doesn't bother me as much. I think it's just the coloring of his skin tone that's throwing things off for me. Of course, the cape itself can be removable if you want to. And also, they seem to still be using that C-clip piece, which I think before was metal. Looks like they're probably using this as plastic now, but it still works the exact same way. The way they've also sewn this too, it doesn't have as much the bunch up as, if we can get this cape out of the way here. When you put it on Superman's neck, for example, and then we compare it with the first Superman, especially with the use of this type of material, it made for a much crinkly looking cape. The new Superman using this material, again, I think works a lot better. I initially did think also that they were going to be using the body again, but if you look at the difference in between the two, and just overlook the coloring right away, the abdominal muscles, for example, are a lot larger on the first Superman release and smaller on the newer one. So while maybe looking at this initially thinking that the torso was the same, the torso also on this one is a lot bigger. The arms is also something that's been changed. So it's really interesting the fact that you would think that they would have gone and tried to save as many costs as they could, but that this new Superman, for example, has bigger biceps. He has a different position for his arm, and even though it's still bent, it clearly is a different mold on this one than on the first one. Legs are also something that's different too. This guy has not skipped leg day. Not that the initial one skipped leg day at all, but the colors are, again, a lot lighter of a blue, a little bit more darker blue on both the blue and on the red. So again, while it does have, again, the changes that they've made here, the emblem, I think, is a little bit nicer here too. It's a little bit wider, which works really well. It short of just, again, not having any of the gimmick feature, because the original Superman from Kenner, if you squeeze the legs, basically his fist would fly forward. I understand that from a costing of producing that, they'd have to throw the gimmick in with different figures. Not all the same figure had the same gimmick. So, of course, to add those additional gimmicks would have increased the cost of this figure line. In the end, they just kind of want to make them inspired by the original superpowers. So things like gimmicks, unfortunately, get left off the table. Now, for the figure's articulation, going back to Superman's head here, the head does rotate back and forth. It's standard articulation, so don't expect too much here. The arms are only going to rotate all the way around. Same with the original Superpowers figures too. And the legs move forward and back. That's all you're going to be getting, with only just a single hinge also getting afforded to the knees. So standard levels of posability, but again, if you grew up collecting the Kenner Superpowers, that kind of goes with the territory. Also too, the figures do have peg holes in the bottoms of his feet, even though the figures don't come included with display stands. That would be one thing I really would like to see. Speaking of things I really would like to see, let's just bring back in Batman. Still one of my favorite superpowers is still the Batman. Let's also bring in Wonder Woman. And even though I didn't bring him in earlier for the comparisons, I also want to bring in the Hal Jordan Green Lantern. A little bit darker on the green. He probably could have gone a little bit lighter, but still, if you're looking for classic looking superpowers figures, good little lineup we got going on right here. I know that they can incorporate a gimmick. Throwing in accessories seem to be hit or miss. Some of the accessories aren't really included for the most part with these figures. And yeah, they don't come included with display stands. Something, though, I would love to see, and it's still not something that they've ever entertained, I don't think, is to include mini comics. If you ever remember collecting the superpowers from the 80s, all those figures had not only accessories, but they also had mini comics. Mini comics, I think, would have been well welcomed. They sort of have already done that already, and this is something I've also mentioned when we did the reviews of other superpowers figures. They've done it really with also those little small figures. What were they called? And they, of course, came included with a comic. Those were all figures back then. And Tom was doing this pretty early into the run of what he was doing when he first acquired the DC run. Page Punchers. That's exactly what it was. The Page Punchers came included with a full-size comic. I think really, is it not that hard to think that they probably could just shrink something down like that and just include a little mini comic? If you're not going to include a gimmick, at the very least, a mini comic would go a long way to make the line even more nostalgic than what it is now. Oh boy, can we again just talk a little bit of the state of that packaging? It's a sting on that. I mean, obviously, I'm not a mint on card collector, the fact that we are looking at this figure loose in this review. But had I been, I would have first of all been really disappointed the fact that they run clear tape just to keep the bubble on top of the card. But then the worst on top of that is that Superman arrived upside down. You know, if you're at least going to try to hide things, I mean, they didn't even hide it either. If you're going to try to patch up the condition of the box, the first thing I at least would ask that you do is make sure that the figure is right side up. Either way, though, still for me, I was going to open him up anyways. But the condition, though, of that, it has to be noted in this review. For Superman, though, alone, one thing, though, I'm really impressed that Todd and his team did was that they made this figure from scratch. I just assumed that he was probably going to be using the same body as the first release Superman, and clearly it isn't the case. Different torso, different arms, different legs, different cape, different head sculpt. And while looking at the head sculpt initially, I would have rather they had given him a neutral expression with a closed mouth instead. The mouth grows on me. The coloring, though, for his skin doesn't. I think, again, it's way too dark, and had they maybe just taken the same tones of skin as they did with the first initial release of Superman, this figure would have looked a lot better than what he does. Yes, he's missing a gimmick. Don't go into this line expecting that any of the superpowers are going to have flailing arms or moving legs like the original ones from the 80s would have done. But if you go into this just with these being inspired by the ones that we got from Kenner, they're doing marvels when it comes to the Kenner stuff. And it's funny that I'm saying marvels and I'm talking about DC. But as we get more subsequent releases, you can kind of really see the progression and a positive progression of what we got from the first Superpowers figures from McFarlane Toys to what we're getting now. If you're one that liked the classic look of the characters back in the 80s, I think what we're getting now for the Superpowers might maybe entice you, where maybe you were on the fence before. What do you guys think of the Superman? Let me know down below in the comments section. And really, between this one and the first release Superman, which one do you think is the better looking figure? Also, again, as well, if you guys did enjoy this video, you can do it a solid, of course, and always hit it with a like. But if you guys want to stick around for more so, I hope so. We are going to be kind of wrapping up things right now, at least in the territory of Superpowers. But there will be, though, more DC Multiverse reviews and other things from McFarlane Toys coming your way this week. So I hope you guys are coming back for those. As always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.